Hello everyone, my name is Jerome and I work at Virtuos Sparx based in Vietnam since 8 years now. I was working on feature film doing FX before joining Sparx, and I came at Sparx to build the FX department for the series and cinematic in pre-render. Then a few years ago we focused our energy to transition in real time, doing also FX for game and working on game cinematic. And since I joined Sparx, I try to develop Houdini usage in our different projects. And today's presentation is a walkthrough about how we utilize Houdini and procedural workflow for our game project. And I will present with Sam Stark, who is based in Kuala Lumpur.
Hi everyone, my name is Sam Stark. I'm a procedural artist in Virtuos Kuala Lumpur. I've been with Virtuos Kuala Lumpur for almost 2 years now. Been worked on some AAA project, but I can't disclose it at the moment. Also worked with Jerome and his team to produce some procedural set dressing tools. Very happy to be here today. Back to you, Jerome.
Thanks, Sam. So let's jump into it. So this presentation is about procedural solution, but maybe it could be a new concept for some of you. So let's start with a little introduction. A procedural workflow use like different block of action called node, and each node is connected to each other to create like a chain of action until the final result. So we have several software using this method, like Nuke for compositing, Substance for texture, and also Blueprint in Unreal. In this specific example, using the software Houdini, we chain a couple of simple actions to explain the concept. So we start with a flat plane node to represent sort of terrain. Then we plug a mountain node to deform the surface. Then we create a group of polygons representing the flat surface of the landscape, pointing upward. Then we want to copy object on those points. We use a copy-to-point node to populate tree over the landscape, and we connect the result to merge node to combine the landscape and the forest of tree. So the power of proceduralism is that it's not a destructive workflow. We can come back in the chain of action, and we can change stuff without breaking everything. So I can change the tree by a cube, and we end up with a forest of cube. Or we can even replace the input plane by a torus, and all the process will update accordingly. So that's why you will see later in the presentation that it's easy to keep a complex process, but just change the input. The geometry we use to populate, and the geometry we want to populate. So usually we can split our procedural service into 3 different main sections. The traditional FX work involving simulation using solver and how we bring it into game engine, but we will not cover in depth this topic today. And today we will share some of the new field we explore, more related to geometry creation using Houdini digital asset in game engine to generate procedural geometry with smart features. The last part is more related to level creation, open world, and procedural placement of assets. So let's start with our contribution on the game Kena Bridge of Spirit. This is a beautiful game created by an indie studio called Amber Lab. And its take its inspiration in Japanese art with a certain level of stylization. So we first onboard this project with a cinematic FX task, and we later explore ways to use procedural modeling. So let's have a look at the FX work we did first. So the cinematic was done in Unreal 4. Some FX has been done by a traditional way using Niagara, and some other was used Houdini. We did the liquid shield here, you can see the shield burst using Vellum in Houdini. The corrupted root creation and animation has been done in Houdini with opacity and incandescence ramp back at the vertex level. And we also did like the root attack FX used by a boss in a game. And all the modeling and animation has been done using Houdini, and we was able to play the Alembic cache in real time during the gameplay. So that was a short description of the FX we did, and it helped me to transition to the next topic, the procedural asset we created for this game. So for Kena Bridge of Spirits, our environment team had to create a lot of wooden structure in this game. So we explore the usage of procedural assets to speed up the work of level creation. The concept of procedural asset is to use simple input like curve or proxy geometry to turn them into complex structure. It allows the artist to modify the asset right into the game engine and display the final result. So a set of parameters are exposed to ensure control on the look and allow the tool to generate almost infinite variation. Let's go over some of those work more in detail. So here is a catwalk tool. We can easily choose the trajectory of the structure with a curve using its input. And we can manipulate the tool very fast using proxy geometry. We can switch to high-res version to see the final result. And we also auto-generate the model of collision to player to interact with. Here is a fence tool. This is also driven by curve. We can match the terrain topology as an option, and we can define broken area using a ramp inside the tool. So this option allows the artist to give unique look for every occurrence of the tool. We also expose other parameters such as number of rail, distance between pole, etc. To fully control the result. Here is the mouse card tool. It can populate mouse and flowers on any input geometry. We have individual parameters for mouse and flowers, which allow the artist to craft unique look for each time they use the tool. We can also easily change the input geometry. Here we change from rock to torus, and the tool will update the result accordingly. The mouse cards are generating on the fly with correct UV and material path. Next is a stairs tool. So this is also driven by curve, and we force the curve to stick to 90-degree angle. We can switch between proxy for fast iteration and high-resolution module for the final look. The proxy geometry is like a bounding box of the high-resolution geometry, so artists can create any set of modules and switch which match the proxy, and it will work with the tool. So it's easy to collaborate with asset team to create customized set of modules and change the look of the stair. Here also, we also generate like model of collision automatically. So here is a stone path tool. It's also driven by curve, also using light proxy for fast manipulation, the colorful one that you see. And now we switch to rock. And new rock with new design could be drag and drop in the tool to keep the logic, but change the visual aspect. So for full control on the art direction. So we expose all the necessary attributes, but not too much to keep the tool user-friendly. We also create a branch tool, a main body with 2 layers of roots on top, twisting along the surface. This tool is also driven by curve in input. And we have parameters to control the thickness along the curve using some ramp. We have parameters to control the behavior of the 2 layers of secondary roots, which twist along the surface of the main branch. The tool also generates the UV by itself, with parameters to control UV repetition on the 3 layers of roots. We push the development of this branch tool further by adding parameters to control how we populate the surface with assets. So, which we can be drag and drop in the tool, such as flower, mushroom, for instance. The tool will generate a moss geometry on top of the branch with correct UV. And we can also generate a moss card to create hanging vegetation. We also create a simple root tool to help design roots crawling on the surface of any input geometry. The tool is also driven by curve, where we can control how the roots spread along the input curve using ramp attributes. And the tool also controls the root thickness and generate UV on the fly. So now I would like to show you some R&D to deal with snow stacking on geometry. And as Sam was in charge of the R&D, I will let him explain what he did.
Thank you, Jerome. Yes, so this was a quick R&D that I've did for quite a while back. The goal of this tool is to help create snow mesh that can cover the input object. to make the environment look more snowy. Now the tool can directly take objects straight from Unreal, which is this building in this case. There are two main controls for the tool. We have one for the stacking snow. We have one for the icicle. For the snow stacking, it was done with scattering particles on the faces of the mesh that are facing upwards. And there are some noise patterns to help with the placement, which can be tweaked as well by the user. We have the particles control on the size and the amount, which can control overall the art direction. The particles are then converted into VDB volume and then to mesh to achieve the final result. There are also additional optimization controls as well. For the icicle, the controls are mostly concerned with the length, the size, and some noise on their shapes. We also have different visualization for controlling each part separately. And after that, we can output the mesh for export. Now the output mesh actually contains a vertex color, which can be used to blend that snow and ice in the shader. And that's it for this tool. Now I'll hand it back over to Jerome to transition into level creation tool.
Thank you, Sam. So now we'd like to transition into something more related to level creation. Another experiment to generate procedural parking lot into Unreal using Houdini engine. So this tool took less than 2 weeks to be created, and it helped to art direct parking lot creation. The parking lot could be generated on the ground level or with floor. For parking lot with floors, the car will be placed in higher quantity in lower floor compared to the higher floor. The tool also takes care of the surrounding vegetation and tree bordering the parking. For the parking itself, we could choose the number of rows, the spacing, orientation, the car density, placement of parking sign, and even dirt on the floor. So this new tool is also related to game level creation to provide an easy way to populate forest area and vegetation. So this tool uses a closed curve to define the area where we want to populate the forest. We can start with a large asset like big trees. The tool allows drag and drop to choose which asset we want to populate. Then we have another section to control the small asset like grass, flower, and rock. We have parameters to control the density of our asset distribution. Then we have the possibility to use other curves to create pathway. It will have mesh visualization to easily control the thickness and noise pattern. The pathway will control a dirt shader assignation on the terrain material. It will also remove large and small assets from its path. Once we are happy with the shape of the path, we can control specific assets to be populated along the path, like small rock and grass, for instance. And we have ramp parameters to control how the assets are populated from the center to the outside edge of the path. It helps to create different biomes between forest and pathway and blend them together with full control. Another option, we added the ability to grow plants on large rock. We also we can drag and drop the specific asset that we want to populate. The other feature we developed was the possibility to control how assets grow when they are next to a large asset, like a big tree and rock. Usually rain are dripping along those surfaces, which make plants grow slightly faster. So we can control how far from the large asset we want to affect the vegetation around. How much bigger we want those assets to be, and we can use noise pattern on that scale to look more organic as well. That was the overview of that tool, which allowed the user to grow some little cute forest wherever they want on the level. This can save a tremendous amount of time for the level artist. Those previous procedural solution was involving Houdini and Houdini engine, but Unreal recently released a new way to procedurally place vegetation right into Unreal Engine with a new technology called PCG, which stands for Procedural Content Generation, and I will let Sam take over this part.
Thank you, Jerome. Yes, so procedural content generation is a fairly recent plugin for Unreal Engine. I think it was released earlier this year. Or maybe you would be more familiar with the demo from Epic Game. Can you press? Yeah.
Next.
And here's my first reaction when I saw it. Now, generally speaking, procedural PCG is a procedural tool, just like Houdini, that takes some input, do a chain of operations, and you get some output. But what do I mean by that? Now, let me give a broad overview of what I meant. So PCG takes in something they call spatial data. So this is your landscape, your splines, your collider volumes, and so on, and maybe even more. Plus some data, either from the users or from the tool developers. So these are like your common parameters. They are the number sliders, your text box, your checkbox, and so on. Now, what's interesting is that in PCG, this is actually extendable. So you're not limited to this. You can actually create custom node to pass even more complex data to PCG graph, but more on that later. Now, after you use all these data, doing some operations to them, you most likely end up with generated points, maybe with the bounding box too, as you have seen in this picture. And then you can use these points to generate instance mesh, blueprint, and maybe even use them as spline points on a new spline. Now, of course, I'm speaking very broadly here, but this kind of like points and spawning from points is basically what PCG are mostly used for, objective goal-wise, of course. That's why foliage scattering is the most common use in PCG, but of course there are more possibilities with it, and these are some of the use cases that I've found people are doing online. So you have, again, the demo from Epic Games, Electric Dreams. There are also some people spawning modules and assemble a building with it. Some with simple procedural city, or even just simply adding stuff to a mesh like the moss here. Now, allow me to go deeper to show you how PCG graph actually looks like. So just like the Houdini one that you've seen just now is a node graph. But additionally, you can actually create custom node that can be used in this PCG graph, which itself is actually a blueprint graph. And what's interesting is that it has the same functionality as the blueprints. So that means you will have the ability to interact with almost all of Unreal Engine. Now, during early exploration, it wasn't really easy. There was a lack of online resources for this like brand new system. There were performance issues, a lot of unexpected crashes as well. But after half a year later, I'm very glad to say that there's many online resources available now. And with Unreal 5.3, I'm actually very happy to report that I've yet to experience any major crashes. So today I want to use this chance to share with you a recent exploration that we did with PCG. Now the goal of this exploration is to actually replicate the forest tool that you have seen from a few slides ago from Houdini, but this time with PCG. So you can see the result of the generated biomes in the video. So there are other stuff that we wanted to improve as well. One of them are iteration speed. We want the tool to work much faster than Houdini this time. And another thing that ties into it as well is that we want to use everything in Unreal Engine to improve the user experience. And spoiler alert, is actually, we haven't fully achieved that yet, but more on that later. Now to improve the iteration speed, we separated the abstraction into 3 basic levels. So here you have the blueprint that you can simply drag and drop into the level. They are preset, so they already have the perfect setting, which can help quickly populate an area. So the tools are actually separated into 3 stages. So there are 3 tools that you will have to use sequentially. So stage 1 deals with the large objects. So they are your trees, your boulders, and so on. And stage 2 deals with foliage clusters. So these are like your bushes. And they will be generated avoiding the big object from stage 1. And stage 3 deals with scattering foliage around this large object from stage 1 to help blend with the environment better. Now on the next level, I'm starting from the default tool. So I will have to adjust the parameters this time instead of relying on a preset. Now it's not any difficult to do so too. And the most important point here is that I want to point out how fast it is to modify and get the update, which is very easy for users to iterate on. Now some of you might have noticed that with just a few clicks of button, I have assigned so many assets with the use of a data table. Now more on that later. But of course, it's possible to assign them one by one manually, which is what I'm doing here in this video. Now allow me to do like a really quick and simple breakdown of the actual PCG graph. So this is how the PCG graph looks like. It basically contains a set of instructions. So first, I calculate the bounding box size, roughly, based on the available assets from the inputs. And then I sample points from the landscape with this calculated sizing in mind. And then I do some random scale and offsets as usual. Isolate the points based on layer mask, splines, and so on. There's also a custom node to help assign the mesh static mesh path in Unreal, along with some extra attribute like normals and stuff. And then I do self-prune. That's to remove any intersection with each other. Finally, then the points would be ready to use to spawn mesh, yeah. And here are some of the visualization of what I just said. Of course, this is like the most simplified section of all the tools, but all the tools are built similarly this way, with some extra functionality like copy to points, noise, custom grow function, and so on. Now, of course, I understand this is very, very simplified, so please feel free to ask any question later during the Q&A session if you have any. Now, as biome system grows, it can be very difficult for users to handle, which can quickly get out of hand. So with that in mind, it is very important to keep the UI minimal, which is very important to help minimize the kind of decision making that an average users have to make. So you can see that there's almost very little parameters that the users can use. Now, as the biome system grows, a sort of like consistent data sharing system is needed. Now, previously in Houdini, this was done with JSONs, which are non-engine element. And when adding source control on top, this can quickly get out of hand for users to manage. Here instead, we utilize data table, which is much easier to use, has much better UI than the text-only JSON, which can, of course, be shared across different instances as well. Now, that was how I was able to assign so many assets in just a few clicks in the video just now. Here's an overview of the hierarchy level of the tools that we have. Now you have the blueprint that you can just drag and drop into the level. Some of you might have noticed that the settings that I was playing with just now are actually in the blueprint component, which we use it as layers that can be added, duplicated, create preset, or drag and drop into the blueprints, highly reusable. Of course, there are the asset data table that we've just talked about. And on a lower level, we have the actual PCG graph and subgraphs as well, which are used by the developers. And of course, custom PCG nodes that are used throughout these graphs. And on an even lower level, we have C++ to help write custom behavior and UI throughout these blueprints and custom nodes. So at the current stage, here are some of the key takeaways that we have for PCG. Now again, everything in engine. So with this kind of contained workflow, we find that it brings much faster and more accessible experience for the users. Now there's a very important point that I've left out, which is runtime generation. Check out this demo from Epic. So the important aspect here is actually that it sets aside PCG with Houdini, as Houdini actually only does offline generation. Basically what that means is that you bake the output mesh after you're done with it, and that's it. But PCG actually do it in the game as the player moves around. Now remember, I've talked about that we actually haven't used everything in Unreal. So we believe that it's possible to further expand the capabilities by incorporating different elements in Unreal Engine. So for example, geometry script from the famous Lyra demo, which can deal with mesh manipulation. There's also a new plugin called landscape patching that can deal with landscape manipulation. And I've actually seen some people using it with PCG already online. And on the UI side, we have Slate Custom UI, and the list goes on and on. But of course, this doesn't mean that PCG can like do everything, of course. There are still complex stuff that only Houdini can handle. So it is important to know what PCG are great for and what Houdini are great for, which will help you distribute the workflow to them accordingly. Now, we think PCG has huge potential, and I personally can't wait to see where it goes on. Now, that concludes this section here in PCG. Now I'll hand it back to Jerome to bring all this to a conclusion for us. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Sam. So let's talk also about the Houdini tool key takeaway. So we did like a bit of walk around of the different procedural solution. And I would like to sum up with you the key takeaway about using also Houdini in production. So for procedural asset work, the time to develop them is not necessarily much longer than creating like a single instance manually by a traditional way. But the benefit of those assets, those smart assets, could be huge. We can use these procedural assets several times in the game level while having each instance look slightly different. It's also helped to maintain consistency of look as everything is generated from the same process. However, an interesting point is the ability to swap instances if used in the tool. So the core logic stayed functional, but the output aesthetic can change. We can integrate smart logic into the tool like terrain adaptation, working on other assets, having tool like rivers, which can modify terrain height field, generate flow map, etc. A good point is that users don't need to know Houdini. If we provide good documentation like video recording, they just have to follow the guideline, and the ramp up is quite quick to use the tool. And when it comes to level tool, here also the benefits are interesting. Those tools usually take more time to be developed, but it could save a lot of time down the line and avoid manual placement. Everything is driven by the inner rule we establish on the tool. So we end up with a non-destructive workflow where we could simply iterate on those rules and regenerate an entire level on the fly. For process a bit heavy, this can be sent offline through PDG, procedural dependency graph in Houdini is to link like different actions together, to not block artist machine. And we could also use data table or JSON file to save and transfer parameters from one tool to the other. Those levels that could be used those tools could be used for whiteboxing a level as well as creating the final output. So we are not limited to only manipulating asset or geometry, but those tools can help on placement of sound, FX, decal, and any other interesting data from the game. So that's it for today's presentation. Hope we help you to understand the benefit of procedural approach for game creation. If you have any question, please feel free to raise it now, come to our booth, or contact me or Sam by email. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, thank you to Jerome and Sam. We've got a bit of time. Would you like to take some questions from the floor? Would that be okay? Or would you like to take it offline? Which would you prefer?
If anyone has
okay.
questions, we are happy to answer.
So anyone has any questions for Mr. Jerome and Mr. Sam? None? Everybody understood what they said? Confirm? So would I ask them to ask questions to you? None? Okay, I think maybe they're shy. All right, so maybe they'll ask you offline when you return to your booth, and do go and visit them. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, Jerome and Sam, everybody, can you please give them a round of applause?
Thank you.